A betrayed husband uncovers his wife's secret affairs, exacts a calculated revenge, and disappears from her life. Tom was immersed in analyzing new test data, a monotonous yet crucial task for the team's month-long project on the test vehicle. Despite the repetitive nature, he continued correlating and organizing the figures for review. Mid-task, his phone vibrated with a new text alert. Initially, he paid no mind to the sender, focusing on his work. After a short break, he glanced at the message, noticing it came from an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Though he was tempted to ignore it, assuming it was spam, he hesitated, wondering if it could be a coworker's unlisted number. Opening the message, he was stunned to find a graphic image on his screen. It took a moment for him to comprehend the unexpected content, a close-up of a woman's intimate parts, clearly showing a recent tattoo. The attached text read, "Look closely, you still have time." Bradley's 6 p.m. At first, he thought it was a mistaken attempt at solicitation and even found the situation somewhat amusing. But a second look at the photo revealed a tiny detail that froze him in place: a mole near the woman's private area, unmistakably belonging to his wife Tanya. Doubt and disbelief overwhelmed him as he desperately searched for an alternative explanation, but the evidence only reinforced his fear. Questions flooded his mind as he recalled Tanya's supposed trip to Boston for a critical work event. Yet the image before him told a different story. It was 5:15 p.m., and the timing clashed with Tanya's reported arrival in Boston at 4:30 p.m. She usually called after landing, but perhaps she was caught up in arrangements with her colleagues. Despite the storm of emotions, Tom chose to respond to the text before taking any further steps. His reply was simple but expected. "Who is this? How did you obtain this image? Am I supposed to meet you at Bradley's?" With his day winding down, he made a firm decision to drive to Bradley's, determined to find out what was happening. He sent Tanya a casual message: "How was your flight? I'm heading out for dinner, call me when you can." He aimed to keep things calm and gather information without raising suspicion. As he headed toward his car, another message arrived. Assuming it was from Tanya, he checked his phone but saw it was from the unknown sender: "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me." Feeling a wave of anxiety, he rushed to his car, checking the map for directions to Bradley's. It was a 30-minute drive, and with the clock at 5:40, he knew he'd arrived just after 6 p.m. He wasn't sure how important the timing was, but hoped he wouldn't miss whoever the sender wanted him to meet. On the drive, another message came through, this time from Tanya: "Crazy time with the team. I'll call you later before bed. Love you." He pushed thoughts of that conversation aside, focusing on the mysterious meeting at Bradley's and the unsettling knowledge the sender seemed to have about his wife. He arrived at 6:12 p.m., his heart pounding as he parked. Without any specific instructions from the texter on whom to look for, he assumed that whoever had sent the message knew him and would approach. But it was the mention of a more interesting encounter that worried him most. The sender seemed privy to information that he didn't have, making him fear a potential setup. Yet he had no other way to uncover the truth, and the explicit image of his wife haunted him. He had trusted her completely, believing their relationship was fulfilling. But the mere existence of such a photo raised troubling questions, and he was now minutes away from confronting the reality, a prospect that filled him with dread. Stepping inside, he let his eyes adjust to the dim atmosphere. Unfamiliar with the pub's layout, he paused at the entrance to take in his surroundings: a large dining space stretched ahead, with a bar to the left. He chose a seat near the end of the bar, ordered a draft beer, and scanned the room. His attention settled on a man who had just picked up his drink and was making his way toward a table of smiling people. Among them, he saw Tanya, dressed in her little black dress and pearls, her smile bright. Tom moved forward mechanically, heading toward the table where she sat. As he got closer, Tanya's expression shifted from warmth to shock. She froze, wide-eyed, upon spotting him. Undeterred, Tom continued until he reached the table, then grabbed a fistful of the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand, pulling sharply. The man yelped in pain as he dropped his drinks and stumbled backward, falling to the floor when Tom released his grip. Tom raised his right fist, but the man's hasty retreat left him out of reach. Recognizing him as Pete, Tom warned him sternly, "Stay down," disheveled and drenched in spilled drinks. Pete complied without a word. Turning back to Tanya, Tom noticed the silence that had fallen over the table. The faces staring back at him were those of Tanya's colleagues, people who had shared dinners and gatherings at his home. He couldn't help but think that their loyalty to the team outweighed their loyalty to him. except for one anonymous person who had chosen to reveal the truth. He briefly considered identifying this person but decided it wasn't worth the effort. Addressing Tanya, he told her he was going home and suggested that if she wanted any chance of saving their marriage, she should leave with him right then. Tanya nodded quickly, but before she could get up, he gestured for her to wait and asked for a moment. Turning to Betty Wilson and Bob Thoron, who were seated nearby, he prepared to speak. He turned to Betty and asked if Bill believed she was in Boston, then directed a similar question to Bob regarding Alice. Their avoidance confirmed his suspicions, making him wonder if the entire team was complicit, though he realized that at least one had broken rank. The drive home blurred by, ending abruptly when he pulled into his driveway. Inside, he grabbed a beer, sank into the living room, and began reflecting on his acquaintances, those he knew well, like Bill Wilson and Alice Thoron, and the unfamiliar faces of the other couples he'd seen earlier. With uncertainty gnawing at him, he considered calling Bob or Alice, but chose to send a simple message instead. Just heard Tanya's travel plans changed. You might want to check in on that he left any further investigation in their hands, feeling a faint sense of closure amid the confusion. About 20 minutes later, he heard the garage door open as Tanya parked. He stayed in the living room waiting. She walked in, still wearing her little black dress, but her flashy heels and jewelry were gone. She quietly took a seat across from him on the sofa. Tom held his silence, knowing how powerful it could be in conversations like this. He was determined to let it stretch as long as needed. It didn't take long for Tanya to break the silence. "It's not what you think," she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. "You don't have any idea what I'm thinking right now," Tom replied coldly. "I don't need an elaborate explanation. We're both engineers. And we know there's never a definitive answer to any why question, just attempts to justify a bad situation. So I won't ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long has this been going on? How often? How often? How many times do our friends know? Besides the people at the table. Who else is aware of this? Have I been branded the oblivious husband among your co-workers and friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya insisted. "Our team's plans changed unexpectedly. Instead of returning home and then traveling again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay here for a day off before heading out. It made sense." "I didn't see everyone from the team at Bradley's," Tom noted. "Where were the rest?" "When we got the news, some decided to stay home an extra night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to lie to me," he countered. "You seemed pretty close to Pete. Is there something between you two that you want to share with me?" "Well, for one, Pete's a good guy. He convinced the owners at Bradley's not to press charges," she said, attempting to turn the conversation in a positive direction. Tom stared at her in disbelief, stunned by her misplaced loyalty. "I couldn't care less about Pete. If he hadn't stumbled, I would have punched him. Whether charges were filed means nothing to me. I've spent a night in jail before, it's not a big deal. Might even make for an interesting court story." He added with a wry smile, "Do you love him?" Tanya paused, gathering her thoughts, clearly weighing her response. Tom could see the wheels turning in her mind, knowing that silence can fill in the gaps in a conversation. He could feel this wasn't going to end well. "He's not my boyfriend, Tom. There's nothing between us like that. Sure, I should have told you about the change in plans, but it seemed insignificant. Whether I was here or in Boston, you weren't expecting me home. I was committed to the team. And we were just having dinner before heading to our rooms. There was no need for you to react like that. You embarrassed me in front of my entire team," she argued, trying to bluff her way through the situation. Tom pulled out his phone, unlocked it, brought up the explicit text, and slid it across the coffee table toward her. Her face changed as she recognized the photo and its context, realizing she couldn't deny it this time. Her bravado faded and she began to speak with less certainty. Tom quietly activated a voice recorder app on his phone and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Tanya, our team is, well, we're very close in many ways. A lot of us," she started, choosing her words carefully. "We have a small group that meets regularly. Everyone who was at Bradley's is part of that. We've been putting in the extra effort on this proposal. You know how much time I've spent preparing for our pitch. I don't remember when it all began. But it started sometime after Pete became the program manager. We worked closely, and I felt drawn to him. Things just evolved," she admitted. "No explanations necessary," Tom interrupted. "Falling into bed with someone doesn't just happen. There are choices, conscious decisions. We both know that, so don't insult my intelligence, he ticked off one of his questions. So almost 6 months, right? That's when Pete took over as PM, she nodded, confirming his suspicion. And the team, he continued. Was it everyone? He left the implication hanging, not naming the nature of the relationships. She nodded again. Pete thought it would build trust and strengthen our unity. He believed it would make us better as a team, she replied, as if that explained everything. So that convinced all of you to form some kind of coalition, Tom asked, his tone sharp. Don't be crude, it's more than that, she replied defensively. I feel a deep connection with Pete and my team now, stronger than ever. Tom sensed the tension growing. Well, unfortunately, you might notice some changes in your team soon, he said, his tone turning dark. What did you do? Tanya gasped, alarmed. Tanya, dragging others into this only deepens the damage. They should make their own decisions. Our focus needs to be on us. Tanya, I can't just keep quiet and pretend nothing happened. I care about Bob and Alice, honestly. I like them a lot more than Betty and Bill at this point, he said. I messaged them about the changes in your plans. What they do with that information is up to them. I can live with my choices. Tom, our team is the most successful in CR Inc.'s history, she practically shouted, her frustration showing. And you benefited from that too. Just because our meetings were on Wednesdays didn't mean you were left out. I always made time for you. So I was closer with my team a bit earlier. What's the problem? You never even noticed. She sneered as she continued, pointing to the photo he'd shown her. You really want to know about that picture? Fine. It was taken right after Pete finished inside me. Yes. He did that with your loving wife. What you don't see in the photo is Betty. She took it just before she joined in. So now you know, you never got seconds or dealt with another man's leftovers. If you didn't know about it, it might as well have never happened, right? Tom listened in disbelief as the full extent of her betrayal and his own blindness unfolded. Now that he was aware, just because his fragile ego was bruised, she accused him of wanting to destroy everything she and her team had built. Tanya's voice was sharp, her frustration boiling over. Tom could feel his pulse quickening as she fiercely defended the dubious practices within her team. His own anger grew with every word she spoke. For a brief moment on the drive home from Bradley's, he had considered the possibility of forgiving Pete just this once. But that thought had quickly died. He had heard enough and didn't care to listen any longer. Still, Tanya persisted. No way are we letting you off the hook, she snapped. You're going to text Bob and Alice back, telling them you heard from me and that we were stuck in Atlanta but have reservations for the morning. That's the story, and Betty and Bill will back it up. And you're going to support them, damn it. She shouted, her voice rising. There are millions at stake with this deal, and your hurt feelings don't mean a thing. Send the text, and then we can talk about our next steps. Talk about our next steps, Tom shot back. There's nothing to discuss. You're leaving. You and your twisted little circle, including your ringleader Pete, can do whatever you like. We're done. I'm contacting a lawyer this week to start the divorce. It's simple 50-50 split. You keep your retirement, I'll keep mine, Tom declared. Now go, use those reservations, head to Boston, and add another win to your list. Tom, please send those texts, Tanya pleaded, her tone softening. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I might miss out on tens, even hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just think about all the places we could visit with that money, just the two of us. Forget about this mess. And I'll earn back your trust. Please, Tom, don't let some irrational hang-up over meaningless encounters ruin everything. Pete says I'm on the fast track to an executive role. All I have to do is keep producing results for a few more years. Don't you want that for me, for us? She urged. Tanya, just go, Tom managed to say before he felt a hard blow to his back, knocking the wind out of him as he collapsed to the floor, a knee digging into his back. Don't hurt him too much, Tanya interjected, her voice laced with a mix of concern and hesitation. Pete leaned in close to Tom's face, sneering. Still deciding if I should break your nose, he mocked, as Tom lay pinned to the ground. So Tanya's wearing a wire. Now I know where her loyalties lie, Tom thought grimly. We'll see whose nose ends up broken, Pete jeered. Get his phone and type those damn texts. We don't have time for this nonsense. Someone hauled Tom off the floor, a lone individual struggling under the effort. Tom feigned injury, forcing the person behind him to use considerable strength to get him upright, revealing his captor as a weak office worker, already breathless from the exertion. Tom focused on steadying his breathing and taking stock of the situation. Unlike Pete and his polished team of salespeople, Tom's team operated in the field alongside the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Though his crew of engineers wasn't on par with those elite soldiers, their time spent on test missions meant they had the chance to improve their physical conditioning under the guidance of seasoned professionals working closely with aircraft modified by Tom's team. If the members of the 160th showed up at your door, it meant your time was up. Tom's group designed the equipment essential for accessing and, more importantly, escaping dangerous locations, taking pride in their contributions to successful missions and the safe return of everyone involved. The regiment deeply appreciated Tom's team, but none more so than Master Sergeant Troy Baker. MSGT. Baker had a fearsome reputation among his peers. Everyone, from fresh recruits to top brass, respected him for his leadership and unwavering commitment to his team during missions worldwide. He was known for never abandoning a teammate, a reputation that was cemented during a mission in Colombia. During their first operation, MSGT, Baker advised a young lieutenant to stay close. When the FARC ambushed them, Baker initially thought the lieutenant was holding his own until he saw him down, bleeding from a head wound. The medic reported that he was gone, but Baker hoisted him onto his shoulders anyway, insisting he's coming home with us, alive or not. The medic thought Baker had lost his mind, given the grueling 5-kilometer trek back through dense jungle to the extraction point. Even returning unscathed would have been a challenge, let alone carrying a lifeless body. But anticipating the medic's concerns, Baker reassured him, "I'd do the same for you, Billy. Stay close in case I need you." The story that followed became legendary. When they reached the base, the medic reported to the doctor that the lieutenant hadn't made it. But the doctor, upon examining him, shone a penlight into his eyes, and the medic watched in disbelief as the lieutenant's pupils contracted under the light. The doctor turned to the medic and asked if he wanted to reconsider his earlier assessment. They rushed the lieutenant into surgery, reviving him against all odds. MSGT. Baker was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. He was a symbol of resilience in a world that favored shortcuts, a man who valued precision and durability. He held a particular respect for Tom and his crew, and during the downtime between missions, he showed his appreciation by teaching them basic yet effective hand-to-hand defense techniques. "It's better to have some skills, just in case," he'd say. "I get it, the biggest threat most of you face is probably a jammed copier or a nasty paper cut. But if you stick with this line of work, you might find yourselves in some colorful situations. Now, if you run into a local with an attitude, at least you'll have something to fall back on MSG'd," Baker would explain. But hopefully a paper cut remains the worst you have to deal with. As Tom steadied his breathing, he pretended to be compliant, recalling MSGT. Baker's advice: "Sometimes you'll be at a disadvantage, taking hits. It's tough, but it happens. The trick is to remember that even while you're getting knocked around, you can still fight back. You just have to be smarter than your opponent." Tom remembered these lessons, subtly resisting and gradually sapping the strength of the man restraining him. "Give me the phone," Pete demanded, glaring down at him. "Now you know I've been with your wife, and so has every guy on the team. Stop with the tough guy act, Tom. You're nothing but a weak, obedient nerd. Do as you're told, and maybe, just maybe, you'll still have a shot with Tanya when we're not with her. Think about all the comforts you'll enjoy with her. Bonus should help dull the pain. Who knows, she might even buy you a nice robot to keep you company when she's busy." Tom gritted his teeth as Pete reveled in belittling him, trying to coerce him into compliance. Pete demanded to know where his phone was, spotting its outline in Tom's shirt pocket. He reached out with his right hand to grab it. Tom stepped back swiftly, driving his heel into his captor's shin, making him stumble with a pained yelp. Flexing his arm, Tom freed himself from the hold as the man crumpled under his own weight. Pete's eyes widened as he registered what was happening. With his right arm extended, Tom rotated his shoulder, just as the Master Sergeant had taught him, and delivered a powerful punch to the center of Pete's face. He felt the bones shatter under the impact, blood pouring from Pete's nose as he crashed to the floor. Tom then turned to see who had tried to restrain him. It was Bill. now lying on the ground, clutching his leg and sobbing about what he believed was a broken foot. Tom stomped on Bill's foot, prompting another agonized scream. "That should clear things up," he remarked. Turning back, he saw Pete struggling on the ground, hands pressed to his bloodied face, attempting to get onto his knees. Tom approached him, leaned down close to Pete's ear, and whispered, "Looks like your nose took the hit. Guess you weren't ready to take one for the team after all." He then delivered a sharp punch to Pete's temple, rendering him unconscious. With adrenaline surging and his breathing ragged, Tom scanned the room for Tanya. Suddenly, he felt a sharp blow against his back and neck, forcing him down to one knee. He spun around to face the new attacker and saw Tanya standing over him, clutching a cast-iron skillet. Her swing had missed its mark, grazing his side. Rising to his feet, Tom roughly wrenched the pan from her hands. Tanya, desperate, began to plead. She insisted that they could still fix the situation, urging him to think about the money he was walking away from and promising to end her affairs for good. She vowed to cut all ties and suggested they could return to how things used to be between them. Rubbing the back of his head, Tom stared at her, astonished at how quickly she shifted her demeanor. He compared her to the shape-shifting alien in John Carpenter's The Thing, constantly adapting to whatever challenge arose. The thought made him smirk. Mistaking his reaction for agreement, Tanya moved closer, trying to embrace him. He blocked her with his left hand, and after a moment's thought, delivered a swift punch to her nose with his right, breaking the bone but not knocking her out. Tanya collapsed to the floor, wailing in pain. "It hurts like hell, doesn't it?" Tom remarked, his voice cold. Tears streamed down her face, her breathing labored as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Works every time." Tanya, through her tears, demanded to know why he'd hit her. Tom, unrepentant, explained simply that he did it because he could. He continued recording the scene, confident that he had enough evidence to justify his actions, even if it painted him in a less than flattering light. Remembering the Master Sergeant's lessons about acting decisively, Tom surveyed the room, noting Bill's distressed state and Tanya's attempts to stem the bleeding from her nose, while the others remained still. Tom allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, silently thanking the Master Sergeant for the training that helped him handle the situation, but he couldn't ignore the potential fallout for Loverboy Pete and Bill. He regretted the missed opportunities and the potential financial loss, but decided to delay calling the authorities, wanting the chance to question Tanya further. Kneeling beside her, he demonstrated how to manage her nosebleed. As the rush of adrenaline faded, he suddenly felt drained, sinking into a chair across from the woman he thought he knew. He looked at her, still grappling with the betrayal and questioning the full extent of her deceit. "What were you really aiming for, Tanya? Was becoming a VP worth all this?" he asked. Tanya confessed that it might have been had Tom supported her plans, but admitted that their current situation had set her back. Tom pressed on, asking about their relationship's future and whether more lies were inevitable. Tanya admitted that dishonesty could continue if it suited her ambitions. Tom learned from Tanya that Pete had warned her about Tom's uncompromising values and idealism, advising her to distance herself from him to achieve success. When Tom asked when Pete had shared this advice, Tanya shot back, implying there were many things he didn't understand about her relationship with Pete. Despite Tom's silence, Tanya continued, sharing her perspective on career progression. She revealed that following Tom's advice had only earned her a few compliments, and it wasn't until Betty had intervened that she learned what truly worked for women in their company. Tanya claimed that trading physical favors for career advancement was not only effective but enjoyable. Still recording, Tom listened, trying to piece together the timeline of her actions. He asked if these behaviors had started before Pete entered the picture. Impatient with his questioning, Tanya disclosed that she'd begun during the company's Christmas party a year after joining CR Inc. and had stayed committed to that approach ever since. "Wait, are you telling me you've been with the boss too?" Art Vanderlei, Tom asked, incredulous. "Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, anyone on the team who could help boost my career. It cost me nothing to get a little close, and it's easy to manipulate you men when I can steer you with a bit of charm. Especially you, Tom, a little cleavage, and I could lead you anywhere," she sneered. "Even now, you think you've got it all figured out. We told Art where we were going when we left. Right now, he's rounding up the rest of the team, crafting a story to explain our absence. They'll have to handle the presentation without us. But all the extra work with their purchasing managers should seal the deal." Tom considered her words, wondering if he wanted to hear more. Then he shrugged inwardly. Why not? Might as well get the full story, he thought. Extra effort, he prodded. You were always ambitious, Tanya. It was a breeze. I don't even like to call it effort, she laughed. You know the old saying, the worst time I ever had was still pretty great at the conference. Dealing with the men was simple, but with Brenda, the lone woman on the selection board, we had to get a little creative. Turns out, I could seduce a woman too. But I threw Pete in for good measure. She was situationally curious, as she put it, until I made some promises. Let's just say, our bond got a lot stronger after that, and we had the selection board wrapped around our finger. So why all of this? Then Tom asked, genuinely puzzled. If it's all arranged, why the heavy-handed approach? That was Pete's brainchild, the fool. I told him to back off, that I'd come home, smooth things over with you, and still catch our flight, but he just had to play the alpha. And look where that got me back to dealing with Art instead of celebrating with my team. It's fixable, sure. But now I'm behind schedule, she grumbled. You wouldn't have bought me off that easily, he replied. Maybe not, Tanya admitted, but I would have made that flight. Well, you're definitely not making that flight now, Tom said, his tone flat. He thought about how Pete had seemed so well informed and realized Tanya must have had a transmitter on her. Raising his voice, he addressed the room. Hey, Art, you listening? I'm about to call the cops. I'm sure there are multiple felonies involved here, and we haven't even touched on the potential fraud issues. That's a federal contract, isn't it? Tanya, Tom asked, his tone loaded with irony. Yeah, the feds don't look kindly on what was it you called it. Extra effort. I'm sure you and Art have top-notch lawyers, but maybe there's another way. He left his suggestion hanging, allowing the silence to do its work. Then Tanya's phone rang, its ringtone hailed to the chief filling the room. Art, she answered before putting him on speaker. Art's voice came through, smooth and practiced. First, let me apologize to you, Tom. Pete's behavior was a serious lapse in judgment. Rest assured, the board will handle him decisively. Thanks, Art. It's good to know that you and the board take assault and fraud seriously, Tom replied, his voice thick with sarcasm. These are all regrettable claims, Tom. The lawyers will make money off of this, but nobody wants to cause too much trouble. Worst case, we pay a fine, Pete and Bill do some community service, but in the end, you'll be divorced and half as wealthy, Art explained matter-of-factly. Do I sense an or in this story, Art? Tom asked, raising an eyebrow. Tanya always said you were the sharper of the two, but I'm glad we brought her on board, Art continued. Yes, Tom, there is indeed an or. Instead of calling the authorities, perhaps we could strike a deal. I just sent a little something to Tanya's phone, not from me, but one of my tech guys here. They say it'll disappear after viewing. Take a look, it might help restore some goodwill. Tanya opened the message and turned her phone toward Tom. On the screen was a message from the Bank of Grand Cayman, displaying a large sum. And when would that be deposited? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You should find an email with the account number. I realize this has been a difficult day for you, Tom, and I don't underestimate the emotions involved. Tanya is a very attractive woman, but let's be honest, feelings can't be cashed at a bank, can they? No, they can't, Tom agreed, mimicking Art's formal tone. CR will cover the costs of my divorce, and there will be no chance of reconciliation Tanya will file. She can take her personal effects and retirement with her. He paused, considering his options. On one hand, he could expose everything, letting the chips fall where they may. On the other, he could walk away, with Art offering him 5 million reasons to do just that. Does CR have a medical team? Art, Tom asked, shifting gears. Why, yes, Tom. We have some doctors on retainer, Art answered. Good, Tom replied. You'd better put a few of them in a car and send them over to pick up your team. Do we have an agreement then? We do, Art confirmed. Are we finished? Tom, Art asked, his tone businesslike. Goodbye, Art, Tom said curtly, ending the call. Tom slipped his phone back into his pocket after shutting off the recording app. Tanya, thinking the situation resolved, attempted a hopeful smile, despite her bruised and bloodied face. She tried to sound enticing, saying, I knew you'd see it our way, Tom. We can still be friends with benefits when this is over. Her attempt at a charming smile fell flat, the bruises and dried blood marring her usual attractiveness. Tom found the sight strangely amusing and allowed himself a small grin. Tanya, misreading his expression once again, leaned in as if to kiss him. But Tom held her back with his right hand, pushing her firmly until she fell back onto the couch. Her smile vanished, replaced by a pained expression as she landed with a thud. "You really think I'd want to kiss you?" he asked, disgusted, leaving Tanya hurt and bewildered. Standing up, he made it clear that she should take whatever she wanted from the house by the next day. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside Bill, who was still writhing from his earlier injury. "How's the foot?" Tom asked, with feigned sympathy. Before Bill could respond, Tom kicked him in the groin, causing Bill to curl up in pain. Tom then approached Pete, who had managed to sit up, looking relieved when Tom said he wouldn't hit him. But Pete's relief was short-lived as Tom pressed his foot into Pete's groin, forcing him to double over in agony. Without another word, Tom turned and left the house. He got into his car, unsure of where he was heading, but knowing he needed food and a place to rest. He drove to a fast food joint, grabbed a burger, and checked into a Red Roof Inn near the highway. Exhausted, he fell asleep the moment his head touched the pillow, despite the aches from the day's events. He woke early the next morning, groaning as he got out of bed. While brewing motel room coffee, his phone buzzed with a new message. He quickly checked it. "Sorry for yesterday. I can meet you at Thank God It's Friday at the mall. I'll wave you over to my seat at the bar." Tom replied, agreeing to meet, then poured the lukewarm coffee into a paper cup. Determined, he opened his laptop, ready to handle some online banking. Reflecting on his college days, before his relationship with Tanya, Tom recalled his economics professor's advice to maintain an offshore account for emergencies. With that professor's help, he had set up a bank account in the Cayman Islands, which he fondly called his go-to-hell fund. Over the years, he'd steadily built it up, reaching a balance of about $50,000. Now, it was about to receive a significant boost. Tom logged into the secure banking website and, with a few keystrokes, transferred most of CR's payment into his account, leaving $100,000 behind in the original account. After a quick shower and change, he prepared to meet the mysterious texter. He arrived at Thank God It's Friday just after noon, spotting a man about his age waving him over. The stranger was well-dressed and looked composed. Tom joined him at the bar. "I believe you sent me a text," Tom said as he sat down. "I'm sorry about how everything turned out. I don't think there was an easy way to break the news to you," the man began. "Why don't you start with who you are and how you're connected to Tanya?" Tom replied, keeping his voice even. "I was on the team. Left the army after 8 years, got wounded in action, and had a long recovery before being medically discharged. I joined CR about 6 months ago and ended up on Pete's team 3 months back, while chatting with a friend about the job. I mentioned working for Tanya. When he asked for her full name, we realized we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to keep an eye on her. At first, everything seemed great, everyone was friendly, but soon enough, I saw why." He continued, "A couple of months in, Tanya came on to me. She's attractive, sure, but when I asked about her wedding ring, she just smiled and said you were fine with it. I wasn't, and I told her as much. That's when things got cold. Suddenly I was getting all the worst assignments. And Pete was giving me nothing but trouble. I called our mutual friend back and told him what had happened with Tanya. He told me about you and mentioned that it didn't seem like your style to be okay with something like that. He figured there was more to the story and that you needed to know. Pete sent me the photo as a sort of incentive to join in with the team, a little preview of the perks. I decided to quit yesterday and sent you that message." Our mutual friend Tom asked, Troy Baker. If I hadn't met Troy, the man hesitated before continuing. "Let's just say he helped me out when I was a green lieutenant. I owe him a favor or two." "Don't we both?" Tom replied, nodding in agreement. "So what's your next move?" Art laid out my options pretty clearly. Sure, I could get the authorities involved and Bill, Pete, and even Tanya would face legal trouble. But with Art's lawyers, they'd probably come out with a slap on the wrist. We made a deal. You might think I'm selling out. And maybe you're right, but they took the one thing I can't replace. If I can't make them pay in court, at least I can hit them where it hurts the most. It won't bring Tanya back, but I'm starting to think she's not as irreplaceable as I once believed. I have a trip lined up. Make sure to thank Troy for everything. I won't be coming back to work. What about you? Tom asked, breaking the silence. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that you're leaving, they might have a spot for another engineer. I think you'll find Baxter operates a bit differently, maybe more your style. It's challenging, but the perks won't quite match what Tanya's team had to offer. The stranger replied with a small smile. Tom returned the smile, indicating his acceptance of their parting. The stranger stood, prompting Tom to rise as well. With a simple nod between them, they parted ways without saying another word. Fast forward to Monday. Tom had just checked in for his flight to Costa Rica. As he anticipated a relaxing time in Tamarindo, he made his way toward the security checkpoint. Noticing a mailbox along the way, he pulled an envelope from his pocket. It was addressed to the DOJ in Washington, D.C., containing a thumb drive with a recording that he figured might catch their attention, especially if Art's legal defense wasn't as invincible as it seemed. Tom slipped the envelope into the mailbox before continuing on to the security line. Update 9 months later. At his usual spot in a small cafe, Tom received his mail from Anna, who handed him his cold beer. "Thanks, dear," he said, lifting the bottle to take a sip. He examined an envelope, curious about who might have tracked him down. He hadn't made significant efforts to stay hidden, but finding him in a quiet town along the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would have taken more than casual effort. He first assumed that Art's people might have tracked him down. After letting the envelope sit at his home for a couple of days, he felt fairly sure it wasn't dangerous, though he still preferred caution. Carlos, Tom called out to the cafe's owner. "Si, Señor Tom," Carlos replied, walking over. Tom handed him the envelope and stepped back a few paces. Can never be too careful, he thought as he watched Carlos carefully open it. Carlos handed the opened envelope back to Tom, who thanked him, took another sip of his beer, and turned the envelope over, letting a few sheets of paper fall onto the table. He picked up a note that read, "Thought you'd find this interesting, along with a phone number. This has to be from Troy," Tom thought. "He's got the resources to track me down. I can live with that." Flipping over another sheet, he found a copy of a newspaper article featuring a photograph of Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty, all being escorted out of the CR building in handcuffs. The headline read, "4 indicted in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." A satisfied smile spread across Tom's face. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't as formidable as they seemed, he mused aloud, a habit he'd developed since his Spanish wasn't fluent and English speakers were scarce. He enjoyed hearing a bit of English, even if it was just his own voice. "Anna, otra," he called, holding up his empty beer bottle. "Si." Gracias, Anna replied as she took the bottle to bring him another. Tom took a sip from the fresh beer, looking out at the deep blue Pacific, thinking of Tanya.